Hi, um, I'm going to read you Counsel Me. It's something I wrote back in uh, August of 2010 before I became homeless. And I'm going to give this a go at reading it to you. It's on my website at www.hairyorigami.com. And this is an unrehearsed reading. I did write it a few years ago now, and so you're going to have to bear with me. You might expect me to know what's going on. That is not necessarily the case. So, Counsel Me, a play and a film, could be either or both. I wrote it in the interests of combining narrative with theatrical devices into a film. So it's conceptual. Right. Okay, here we go. A man marooned on a desert island finds solace and reprieve from depression by talking out loud as though other people are there, as marooned people do. As his relationship to his environment develops, he acquires a familiarity with certain objects, be they stones, trees, a seashell, a stick, or his very shelter itself. These same objects that he talks to as if they are other living souls start to come alive and develop personalities. The objects will be played by actors who have been in the set all along, if a play, and return to the set when he falls asleep, a bit like Bagpuss. So the basic workshop is eventually a small ship. It's the size of a boat, but in the style of a large ship, if you can get that idea. Comes to shore and he is rescued. To his astonishment, the crew are the same objects as the living humans personified. As he gets on board, they all cheer and cry, "Hooray! Our captain is back!" Although probably not like Alan Partridge. So the characters: a man, a large boulder, nodding tree, roof twins, swinging door. As the play version, the actors will physically on stage be in the set, as mentioned earlier. In the film, the objects will appear as humans whenever he addresses them to start with. Then, as independent entities, they can appear at their own will. They will be dressed with the effect or suggestion of the objects, but he will shelter in a material hut of his own making. That will be very real. Right. Day 1. Man builds a shelter. There is no explanation as to how he got there. He just wakes up on shore. He builds the shelter out of survival instinct, almost automatically, without comment or question. There'll be shots in the film and flashback of him coming to on shore and his instant search for drinkable water and food. He will do this like a trained soldier. Man, as he lies down to go to sleep, he says, "Good night, everybody." Day 2. Man awakes casually at first in his slumber, then he becomes conscious. He sits bolt upright and charges down to the water and wades in. He turns round and round, over and over, as he tries to understand where he is and why. Eventually he walks slowly back to the shelter and sits on the boulder in bewilderment. He searches himself for some item of personal identity, but has nothing. Eventually he picks up a stick and writes in the sand, "Who am I?" And then yells to heaven, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to get thrown out of my new flat. This is my new flat, by the way, not a shelter on a beach. Who am I? He then yells to heaven, "Who am I?" We can hear his voice echo down the cliff face. He hears the echo of his own voice fade into the distance. He turns, angry, to the shelter. "And you? Who built you?" There is no answer. But the door then slowly falls open and leans awkwardly, looking a bit sorry. Then he realizes that he is both hungry and thirsty. Food. Water. He climbs inside the shelter and finds a tattered piece of cloth with some words written on it in scorched charcoal. It says, "The fire. Don't let the fire go out." He repeats the words to himself. Fire? And looks around, searching. He looks back at the words on the cloth. They read, "Now. Do it now." He can't see it, and says, "What fire?" Just as he says that, a small waft of smoke emerges from behind the shelter, and he walks round to find the fire. It is smouldering very low under a raised canopy of branches, and badly in need of some more wood. Wood. I need wood. He spins round to see a well-prepared pile of dry wood, sheltered under an adjacent tree. He puts some wood on the fire, using a large, thick branch with few smaller ones around it to keep it in. He looks back at the cloth and turns it over to read. Water and a little food in the tree. Spring, 3,000 paces left along the shore as you look out to sea and climb cliff. He climbs the tree and finds two small parcels made of a strong green leaf. One parcel is tied at the top with a piece of vine like a purse and contains a small quantity of water, and the other contains a piece of cooked meat. He climbs down and eats the meat savagely and then very carefully drinks the water. As he finishes the water, he looks back to the cloth and speaks the words, 3,000 paces to the left. Why so far? He thinks to himself. He gets up and starts heading in the direction of the spring. As he progresses, he nervously looks back over his shoulder every few steps, as if scared that he might get lost. He glances down at the cloth and suddenly realizes that he hasn't been counting his steps and halts. I forgot to count. He turns round and stumbles back to the camp. He gets to the boulder in front of the shelter, turns round sharply and starts to walk briskly, counting his steps, out on his breath. So, as he progresses, he notices footprints going the other way toward the camp. At one point he stops, repeats the step number, 1,005. He turns round to try his foot in the print. It's an exact match. There is a moment's flashback, and we only see the head of a dead guinea fowl nodding over his shoulder. He looks up toward the camp, turns round and carries on toward the spring. As he arrives at step 3,000, he slowly stops and looks at the cliff face. It isn't too steep, and access looks, well, reasonable. He starts to climb. As he nears the top of the cliffs, he starts to hear a little trickle and notices the rocks are getting damp to the touch. Careful now. No nurse to fix you here, my mate. Just as he says this, his head comes up over the top of the cliff to a small green plateau. As he does so, an animal, a small boar, drinking at the spring, suddenly bolts, which makes him jump, and he loses his footing, but regains his composure without falling. And now, facing out to sea, he holds his hand to his heart and shakes his head and says, I guess that explains the distance. He turns back round and starts to climb over the top, saying, I would say it's my lucky day. As he approaches the water source, he can see a small pool and notices 2 or 3 different animal prints in the soft earth. Someone is a very smart man. He kneels down and starts to drink the water directly from source, where it's coming from the rock face, until he is sated. He drinks insatiably for about half a minute. When he's finished, he stands and looks out to sea. He's transfixed by the view for another half a minute, and then breaks his gaze by looking down into the animal's drinking pool and says, It used to be beautiful. Tears swell in his eyes, but as this happens, he catches his own reflection in the water. A tear falls into the pool, sending small ripples across the reflection. He drops to his knees and starts drinking the water in the rock face like an animal. When he's finished, he looks up sharply with a new and wild light in his eyes. He's still as the rocks around him for about 10 seconds, and then he hears some movement. This causes him to slowly reach down and pick up a sizable and heavy rock, which he silently and carefully lifts up onto a small ledge above the drinking pool. He then starts to climb upward into the position above the placed stone. He's very careful and assumes a comfortable position in the cliff face and waits with his foot placed to the rock. Time passes and shots of wildlife emerging from hiding places are seen. The shadows moved from the sun move round by several degrees, signifying that as much as an hour may have passed. He slowly leans forward, being careful not to dislodge the rock, and he peers down at the pool. There are no animals drinking. He leans back and continues waiting. We can see that he's getting tired. As more time passes and as the shadows move around by as many degrees again, we see him start to fall asleep in position. As his eyes struggle to a shut position, there is a moment's silence as the breeze drops to dead still. Suddenly his eyes open wide and alert, and he leans forward again. There is a hare near the pool. Man remains motionless apart from a very slow movement of his foot to the rock as he carefully manoeuvres the rock to an ever so more unstable position. As he does so, the hare moves around the pool, sometimes moving away and returning as if making sure there are no predators. As the hare gains confidence, it finds the best position to drink from. As the hare drinks, man silently pushes the rock over the edge, landing on the hare. As it strikes, man jumps after, landing in the pool, lunging at the hare that is slightly maimed and stunned. The hare kicks out violently with its hind legs, catching man in the eyes. He frantically wrestles to catch the hare. The hare bites man on the hand. With his other hand, man catches the hare at the scruff of the neck and violently throws it against the rock face, killing it on impact. Man clambers out of the pool holding his bleeding hand. Vicious pike. He pushes his limp body with his foot, takes off his boots and drains the water from them, laces them together and slings them over his shoulder. He looks around, annoyed and concerned at the disruption he has caused at the pool, and makes attempts to cover the evidence of his presence. When satisfied, he takes up the hare by its hind legs and stands to his full height. We can see that something has changed about him. His body has taken on an uninhibited presence. His bare feet sink into the soft earth, and his spine has acquired a natural curve such as you find in a native Africa. He looks like he owns his environment. He goes to the cliff's edge and looks back at the pool. We can see blood dribbling down his hand and collecting in the fur of his catch. From his perspective, we look up the continuing rock face into the glaring sun. And from that raised perspective, we look down again to see him disappear over the edge of the cliff face and make his descent. Some time later, we see a pair of boots land in the dry sand at the base of the cliff, followed by the dead hare. We see the shadows move around by a degree or so, followed by his bare feet, landing together in a jump next to the boots and the dead hare. He takes up the boots and the hare, holds the hare up by its hind legs and looks at its face and says, "Come on, fella, your days of boxing are over." We can see that his eyes beginning to swell where the hare kicked him. We follow him back to the camp at low level, with the camera travelling over his footprints from day 1. Day 2, night. There is an animal skin hanging like a sack from the tree. It drips slightly. As he approaches, we can see that it is a hare's skin. He lets it loose and pours some small quantity of water from the skin into a seashell and drinks. As he sits, we see a string of gut next to a sharp piece of wood whittled to a spike and a shard of pebble flint among the scatterings of a larger smashed pebble. The hareskin turns a slight breeze from its hanging position, and we see its stitched belly. He looks into the flickering fire, and we see the hare's head burning. It has red eyes looking back at him. He turns his head and reaches for some cooking meat on a stick over the fire. As he does so, we see he has a huge black eye. As he eats it, he says, "I never did like rabbit," and then pauses. Now, how do I know that? He looks back at the burning head. But a hare. He prods the fire and sparks rise. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. He sniggers to himself and tears off some more meat. Maybe I should take up fishing instead, as he remembers his black eye. We cut to the lapping waves and the phosphorescent glow as they land on the shore. The camera turns at low level and approaches the shelter. As it arrives at the shelter door, the door is pulled shut. We see him lying to go to sleep. He rolls over and mutters, "Good night, everybody." Day 3. Night turns to day and the door of the shelter swings open. He crawls out and takes a walk down to the shore. He stands in the water and takes a piss. Or I should say a pee, to say pee. He walks back and takes a seat. His boots are sitting on the boulder dry from the sun. He sits on the boulder and puts them on. As he does so, he says, "What do you say, boulder? You look like a strong sort of fella. Where do we go from here?" There is a brief silence and a deep voice behind him says, "You mentioned fishing." He freezes and then slowly looks around. There is no one there. He turns back and simultaneously falls off the boulder, caught by surprise. There is a very large man, dressed to toe in the colour of a stone, the same colour as the boulder that he's been sitting on. Large boulder, hands on his hips. "You're not tired of me already, are you?" Large boulder reaches his hand out in an offer of help. Man scrabbles backwards in the sand and jumps up. Man says, "Where the hell did you come from?" Large boulder says, "Oh, a very nice introduction from someone that's been sitting on me." Man says, "Sitting on you?" Large boulder says, "Yes, you just complimented me on my strength." Man says, "What?" Large boulder, "Looks like amnesia doesn't just affect the long-term memory. You have been using me as a seat since you got here." "I'll second that." Nodding tree says. Man turns around to see a very tall man, thin man, dressed in what looks like bark. He has long hair and his head nods periodically. Man, incredulous. "And you are?" Nodding tree says, "You have been using him as a seat since you got here. And then you asked him how you should go about your day today." Large boulder says, "Yes, your exact words were, 'What do you say, boulder? You look like a strong sort of fella. Where do we go from here?' says swinging door." Man spins round again to see another man, this time dressed in what looks like green leaf with huge square pockets. He looks a bit flash and wears a hat with a feather in it. "Yes, those were indeed his exact words. Well said, swinging door," said the roof twins. Man turns again to see two girls leaning back to back. They are dressed in a woven green branch effect. They appear to be twins. "What the jackanori is going on?" says the man. There's no answer, naturally. Right, I'm not in my right mind, and these freaks are just figments of my imagination. Yes, that's it, just some kind of amnesiac shock. Just get your things together, man. Find something to eat. Man heads round to the back of the camp and starts to collect his tools and drinking sack. "Well, if that's how you talk to your friends, I'm not surprised you've been marooned on a desert island," says Large Boulder. "They're just a mental bunch of delusions," says the man. Swinging door. "Did you hear that? He called us a mental bunch of delusions." Roof twins. "Very rude." Nodding tree. Yeah, it is rather." Man, addressing swinging door. "And what are you meant to be? Some sort of aristocratic clown?" Swinging door. "I will have you know, you crude gentlemen, that I am the one who enables you to come and go." Nodding tree. Yes, yes, that's right. Swinging door. Thank you, Nodding Tree. Yes, I am your door. You may call me Swinging Door on account of my hip attire. And dapper, is it not? Swinging Door makes an elaborate bow. Oh, and I suppose you are the tree, says the man. Nodding Tree, actually, says the Roof Twins. That's right, says Nodding Tree. Large Boulder. Ha! Got him in one. So, Brain of Britain, what does that make me? Man, sarcastically. Oh, yes, of course. I forgot. You're the large boulder I've been sitting on. Bravo! He's getting good at this, says Swinging Door. Roof Twins. Not good enough. Left Twin says, who? Right Twin says, ah. Twins together say, we. Man drops his things, goes over to the twins, leaning back to back, pauses as he sizes them up, and then abruptly pushes them over. A pair of imaginary, precocious brats, the man says, losing his marbles as well as his temper. The Roof Twins look up at him, and as they do, the roof on the shelter collapses. Man turns to the shelter, and as he does so, the twins stand and dust themselves off. Oh dear, it looks like you have a bit of work to do, they say. Roof Twin 1. If I were you, I would use your special rabbit paw to fix it. Roof Twin 2. The one around your neck? Man raises his hand to his chest and finds a paw hanging from a bit of gut string. Roof Twin 1. You hold it in your left hand and say, Roof Twin 2 says, I'm terribly sorry for pushing you over. Please forgive me. I'm not saying any such thing. I'll fix it later, says the man. I say, you are a savage fellow, says Swinging Door. You're telling me that if I do that, I won't have to fix it. Nodding Tree. That's right. Man looks at Large Boulder. Large Boulder shrugs. It's worth a go, he says. Man, reluctant and embarrassed, closes his eyes and holds the hair paw in his left hand. I'm sorry. Man sighs. I am terribly sorry for pushing you over. Please forgive me. Man opens his eyes and looks at the shelter, and the roof is still collapsed. He looks around and are all rolling around in hysterics, saying, he thought he had a magic rabbit paw, and it's a hair paw. Did you see his face? He thinks he can do magic. Roof Twins rolling around hysterically. You'd better get on and fix it. You'll be hungry soon. Nodding Tree rolling around hysterically. He thought he had a rabbit paw, and it's a hair paw. The rest have got up and are looking very sober, but Nodding Tree carries on. He slowly stops, aware that everyone is looking at him. Together. We've done that bit, you wooden wally. Nodding Tree. Where's he gone? They all look around. Swinging Door. There he is. He's going back to the spring. Large Boulder. Go and help him, Swinging Door. He's got to make a fishing javelin. If he pulls the same stunt with the boar, he's likely to break something a little more serious. The Roof Twins conclude the scene by saying, yes, like his head. And that's that for now.